Well, welcome to Craig Titmus, partner of Mathis and Squire, one of our leading intellectual property firms. Thank you for taking the time out, Craig, to share some thoughts on how your career's played out so far and perhaps where you think you might end up when you conquer the world. And but also just to understand, I guess, for our audience, some tips, some advice, some heads up about what you enjoy about what you do. But maybe if we start, we'll just sort of go with, how did you get to be in the position you're in?
Well, first, thanks for the invitation, Tony. So I'm Craig Titmus. I'm a UK and European patent attorney, as Tony says, at Mathis and Squire, and I work in the life sciences and chemistry team. So my background, I did an undergraduate in molecular biology and biochemistry, then did a PhD in biotechnology, working with Bayer Crop Science in a case-funded PhD looking at some stress-resistant crops. And then I left my PhD and went straight into becoming a patent attorney. I became aware of the career during an undergraduate inorganic chemistry lecture, I think, when I was asked what is I'd like to do when leaving university. And I said, well, I've had a long-standing interest in law. I like science, and I didn't know whether or not there was such a thing as a, sort of a science lawyer. And by coincidence, he had a box full of booklets by an organisation called Inside Careers, and he handed me that. And it was a guide to becoming a chartered patent attorney, and I thought, well, that looks interesting. And I kind of made my mind up pretty much there and then. So I did the PhD. I decided that I didn't want to stay in working at the bench. I quite missed the kind of diversity of science that I really enjoyed in my undergraduate, and really of the career options that were available. And with this booklet on my desk, I decided to make a jump and join a firm of patent attorneys. So I was very lucky. The firm I joined was a really good firm, excellent training, and I was there for 5 years. They're based in central London, and I live in Cambridge, and really there was a finite amount of time that I wanted to continue doing the London to Cambridge commute. And my current firm, Mathis and Squire, were recruiting around that sort of time. There's some very exciting opportunities here at Mathis, and I really like the sort of ethos of the firm, and moved over. So I entered the profession in September 2009. So I've now been at Mathis since about middle of 2014, I think it was. So and joined the partnership about 2 years ago, something like that. But one of the things people often ask about patent attorneys is the training, and it's fairly drawn out and painful, and it goes on for a number of years. I can delve into that if you like, Tony, but really it's quite a long process. So you come in as a totally green trainee, sometimes called a technical assistant, and then you'll sit your exams over a period of normally about 3 or 4 years, and it sometimes takes people a fair bit longer than that. And then you're qualified, and once you're qualified, you're normally an associate. That's normally the term used to describe you. And then if you keep working hard and kind of stay around long enough, then you tend to join partnerships. That's how most private practice firms work, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it is a long road in many respects. It's not for the faint-hearted to say I'm going to study for these exams to go through. I kind of really get that diversity that you liked about the science space. But when you had your booklet in front of you of Inside Careers, and you say like you had the interest in law and science, what other options would you have considered, do you think? Because you see people go into business development and tech transfer, which sort of interfaces with, well, it does interface with the intellectual property side of things.
Oh, yeah. If I'm honest, Tony, I wasn't really aware of those options at the time. I was fairly naive, I think, at that stage. I knew roughly the types of things that were of interest to me, sort of the law as a broad concept, really, and I love science, really. That's was and still is my main interest. I think the legal aspects of my job are something we have to work with, but really what excites me is technologies and the innovations that I'm working on. So yeah, I think quite possibly, had I been aware of business development within this space or tech transfer, then that may have been something that I would have looked into. And actually, obviously, as my career has progressed, I've become much more aware of those jobs. But at the time, I simply wasn't, and it was really a very steep learning curve for me, really, in terms of options that were out there. And I saw this one, and I thought, yeah, that's what I want to do.
Yeah, I think that space, because I mean, I would imagine, going in and wanting to be a patent attorney is quite a competitive space to get into, because it's got lots of attractions to it in terms of that you're dealing with really innovative, leading scientists, engineers, and chemists, if you like, and across the board, it's hard and it's deep, but it's really well respected. If someone was sort of sat in that position now, finishing their PhD and thinking, oh, I'd quite like it. What sort of numbers of patent attorneys are there in the UK, for instance? I don't really have a feel for that.
It's a profession. I think it's in the hundreds. I'd be surprised if it was in the thousands. So there'll be a statistic out there. It's a fairly small profession. Certainly, I mean, patents are territorial. So UK patent is effective in the UK only, and goes for other territories. And something that goes with that is that if you want to work at the UK or in front of the UK Patent Office, is you have to become qualified as a UK patent attorney. And yes, there's not that many UK patent attorneys. Most UK patent attorneys are also European patent attorneys, because most work actually is carried out at the European Patent Office, not so much directly at the UK Patent Office. There's obviously a lot more European patent attorneys out there because they're drawn from more European countries. But it is a fairly small profession, and it's not only private practice like I do. There's also a lot of in-house patent attorneys as well that work for big companies, pharma companies, and what have you. A lot of them have their own in-house teams, and that can be a very interesting career route as well. It tends to offer certain things that private practice don't. You tend to be more closely tied to a product line, for example, and you might be called upon to take part in other broader elements of what that company is doing. Whereas a private practice attorney, you probably have a broader exposure to different types of technology because you're working with different clients, and yet you probably don't get quite the same exposure to really the sort of the nuts and bolts of how your particular industry works.
The sort of journey of the program as it goes, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And when you look at it now, it's like, what if someone's saying to themselves, "Oh, do I think I'm cut out to be a patent attorney?" What would you say is like the defining, if there is one defining characteristic? Maybe there's more than one. I don't know. But,
I don't know. I think there's a lot of elements to the job. It's quite a strange hybrid, really, because it's really to be a patent attorney, you have to have done an undergraduate technical degree. So first and foremost, you have to have some sort of science, engineering type background. That's a basic requirement. You then also have the legal element of the job, and I don't think all scientists necessarily have necessarily that way of thinking, and that's not necessarily a good or a bad thing. It's a bit of a weird mix, I would say, of skills. I think a lot of the job involves explaining or understanding difficult things and simplifying it and being able to explain difficult things clearly. And I think a lot of the job, I think if you enjoy having exposed to lots of different technologies, and there can be hugely varying technologies you come across in your job, really from real extremes. And I think if you enjoy that and you like sort of problem solving, really with science and juggling different concepts, then that's something I really enjoy about the job. So I think pick a patent up and have a read of it. I think a lot of people have a rough idea of what a patent attorney does, but perhaps haven't really seen a patent. And a lot of the interesting stuff that happens in patents are in the what we call claims at the end, and they normally appear at the end of a patent, and they set out what it is you're trying to protect, and that will give you a bit of a flavour for the kind of writing style that you have to adopt for a lot of your work. I
think that's a really interesting point, actually, Craig, because I think there's such an element of converting to written word what someone who's an inventor and a specialist has just explained to you, perhaps even visually, with a gadget or something to play with. You have to somehow describe this in a technical document.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, it must be quite a skill, I would think, because how do you pitch that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, if you think of an example, I don't know, a corkscrew, something like that. If you had to write down in words, how would you define a corkscrew? And that's quite a nice exercise to do, to see if you enjoy the process or not. You know, what are the essential elements of a corkscrew? You know,
that could be a great exam question to set at the end of the careers conference. I mean, can you write a description of a corkscrew?
What we ask in interviews, yeah. But that sort of thing. So really, the fundamentals are the same if you're trying to describe how a corkscrew works, or you know, a staple remover or something like that, or to much more complex technologies. Really, it's all about trying to identify. You know, what are the bits that you can't live without? What do you need for your invention to work? And then you know, what bits are optional and a bit more superfluous. And if you can distinguish those two, you can arrive at patents that cover what they need to cover, and that they can help avoid easy workarounds.
You know, I've been in seminar rooms and events where I've seen you presenting on aspects of intellectual property, and we've worked together on arranging some of those. You know, it always inspires me the way that you can explain this sort of passion you bring to say, look, this is really exciting science, and it comes out by the bucket load. So when you look back on your journey to date, what or who sort of sticks in your mind as having inspired you on this journey?
Well, I wouldn't want to embarrass anybody in particular, but I think, so there's two sides to this, really. I think one of the nice things about this job is that you get to work with some really, really clever people, and I've, between both firms I've worked in, I would say probably most inspiration I've had is from people I've worked with, and taken most inspiration from the people I've worked with and people who have trained me, actually. And I think it's been really nice to see how different people work and how they think, and everybody has their own strengths, and it's nice to kind of see how they approach different problems, or sometimes the same problems, and arrive at a different answer that still works. So that's been quite an inspiration, really, to see different people and how they solve difficult problems, and then from that try and cherry pick the elements of people's characters or ways of working that you like, and try to aspire to do something like that, really. So that's been, the people I work with has been great, and I think I also work with our clients. I don't see it really as a transaction. It is more of a working with our clients, and that can be a great source of inspiration, because we're in a very, as patent attorneys, a very privileged position, really, because the point at which an inventor comes to you is a sort of often the culmination of hundreds and hundreds of hours of painstaking work, and we just get to see it when it's it's perfectly formed, and it's ready to present to a patent attorney.
Is there a case out of that where all this work has gone in and brain power gone into coming up with the invention? Is there, are there any that stick in your mind where you've really sat there and gone, wow, there's just...
Oh, plenty, yeah.
I guess you must do, because you're seeing the front end of these ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. And they can be different things that are interesting. I mean, you can have some which are very topical. Certainly in terms of things like most of my work has been the same in life sciences, and a lot of work on vaccines and diagnostics, and a lot of that work is you're working on patent applications which are being featured in the news and that sort of thing, and that can be pretty cool. But also some of the other things which are probably more interesting, certainly academically, are really interesting applications of biological processes. Adapting things that happen naturally or kind of tweaking them and finding a really cool new industrial application. And then there's one company in particular actually I think is excellent at this, and watching how over really not many years some of these companies have grown phenomenally, really off the back of just one really cool idea, and that's really rewarding actually when that happens.
Because there must be a point where you see products ending on the
Sure.
market. And you think, oh, I saw this, 12 years ago, and it's very Inception almost.
Exactly. Yeah, it's really, really nice.
Must be quite a buzz, I would think, from
Sorry,
that.
Tony, I interrupted you there, sorry.
No, I said I would imagine that must be quite a buzz, I would think, when you see that come to fruition.
Yes.
And it's as exciting for other people as it was for you when you looked at it. I think.
And patents are a commercial tool at the end of the day. I mean, they can be expensive to get, and when companies are really using them well, and that they're feeding into their fundraising activities and what have you, and the companies really go from strength to strength. It's really excellent to see.
Yeah, I think it's often one of those, from my perspective, worked with the industry for a long time. It's one of those almost not unspoken about, but unnoticed things sometimes when you see big deal headline figures or $1 billion plus acquisitions or asset sales, without it being protected as an asset. As you say, it's a commercial instrument. So without that pivotal role of intellectual property protection, there is no deal.
Yeah.
There is no deal. And I think that's one of the things comes out from a number of discussions we've done for these sorts of interviews, but we have all the time. It's just how every bit of this jigsaw, there's a role for everybody of various mindsets and how they approach things, and all of it has to work. But I'm conscious I don't want to take up too much of your time. I get engrossed in, and I think, oh, what's been really exciting, but I guess as well, you made that decision after your PhD to move. If you were in that position now, looking back at your younger self, what advice would you have given that individual?
Yeah, go for it. Really, I suppose would be the first one. I say in retrospect, I'm very pleased I did take that course. Actually, I think it's a fabulous career, and I would highly recommend it to anybody who is thinking about doing it. I think in terms of how I would have approached it differently, I would probably have maybe sought to enjoy the initial journey a bit better, and rather, no one expects you to know everything from the start, but it's quite difficult to kind of see that yourself. You know what I mean? I think it's easy to put a lot of pressure and expectations on yourself to know it, and of course you don't, and it takes a number of years to even get close to that. So I think probably that would be the probably the main advice I could give to myself, is just kind of go with it a bit more, and just accept the fact that it's a bit of a long slog, but it's worth putting the hard work in, because it's a nice, it's a brilliant career. It's very privileged, to work with the people I do, and it's really worth all the hours of training. And another one, as I say, not wishing to take the question lightly, I think would be live where you work. Somebody told me that when I was growing up. I think it was a cousin of mine, and I sort of laughed it off. I thought, well, I'm going to work where I want, live where I want. But actually, the realities of particularly commuting into central London it's a nightmare actually. And I think if you are considering, obviously not necessarily becoming a patent attorney, any job, living near where you work actually can have a massive impact on your overall lifestyle. So
and I think that's probably come to the fore for lots of people during this whole pandemic, to be honest, where you've been not commuting anymore.
Yeah.
and you realize the difference of lifestyle, positive or negative in some respects, I guess, for some.
Yeah.
But I think it's made lots of us question that location bit. And I think that's going to be, I mean, on the location bit, sorry, I'm going to off piece a bit here, but when you see inventions coming through and patent application, do you see parts of the world where you think it's growing in terms of intellectual property attention and business, and parts where you think maybe it's less attractive? If you were someone thinking, where in the world do I go and want to be a patent attorney?
In terms of where you would actually want to set up as a patent attorney yourself?
Yeah.
It's an interesting question. There's some restrictions actually in terms of what you can do, because certainly to become a European patent attorney, that's linked to where you live, for example, or where your sort of principal place of work is. So that would put some constraints. Although that's, you could obviously move house if you wanted. I'm probably slightly Eurocentric. I see, Europe is a fantastic place to be a patent attorney. I think US would be as well. I think it's unusual for a patent application or an invention of any notable value not to go into Europe or the US for patent examination. Japan and China are also very interesting territories, but of course that they come with certain language barriers which we might not be able to work with. But I would say, if you're a European patent attorney, you can work within any European country you like. And so Brexit aside, the European Patent Office won't mind. So I think it's slightly technology specific as well. I mean, I'm about this through a bit of a very much a sort of bio type perspective, but Europe and the US, I would say, are probably the main areas if I had to pick to work in terms of the types of technologies that are in terms of where they're filed. I would say that they're the two probably main territories, in my opinion.
Excellent. Well, Craig, thank you for sharing your journey and your advice and insights. And as with most of these events, we'll be putting a conference app around it where delegates and speakers and everything will be there for people to message backwards and forwards. And I'm sure you'll get lots of questions because it's a very interesting area, and you've sold it really well, I think, from my perspective. So no, I just think it just highlights how much opportunity there is. If you don't want to be in the lab, you don't have to leave science, and I think that's really important. So thank you for that. I look forward to seeing you soon, hopefully in person if we can ever come out of lockdown. And we'll catch up then. But Craig, for now, thank you very much.
Tony, bye.
Thank you. Bye.